I was 70 years old, and my hands shook a little when I tied the ribbon around the box of tea biscuits. Not from weakness, from habit. You spend a lifetime doing things for other people, and your body remembers even when your heart is tired. Mother's Day was 3 days away, and I had already started preparing. Not because my children asked, they never did, but because I was their mother, and mothers prepare even when they shouldn't. I made a list and stuck it to the fridge the same way I did when they were small. Milk, sugar cubes, fresh lemons, butter, flour. 3 names written neatly at the bottom. Mark, Rachel, Andrew. All grown, all busy, all still living close enough to visit if they wanted to. As I folded the old lace tablecloth, I remembered how my own mother used to say, "Love shows in the details." She died believing that. I wasn't so sure anymore. I cleaned the house slowly over several days, not because it was dirty, but because cleaning gave me something to do with my hands while my thoughts wandered. I dusted the bookshelf and paused at a photo. All 3 of them, standing in front of this very house. Mark had his arm around my shoulders. Rachel was laughing, head thrown back. Andrew was pretending to look annoyed, but his eyes were smiling. That was years ago, back when I thought raising them well meant they would come back to me. I wiped the frame and put it back carefully, like it might break if I didn't. The morning of Mother's Day, I woke before the alarm. I always do on days that matter. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and golden, and for a moment I let myself believe this day would be different. I showered. I put on my good cardigan, the blue one Rachel once said made me look less old. I set the table, 3 cups, 3 saucers, 3 folded napkins. I hesitated, then added a 4th cup, just in case. The kettle whistled. The smell of baked goods filled the kitchen. Cinnamon rolls cooling on the rack, scones wrapped in cloth to stay warm. I checked my phone. No messages. I told myself it was early. By 10 o'clock, I was sitting upright on the sofa. By 11, I was pacing. At noon, I reheated the water and refreshed the table like nothing was wrong. At 12:30, my phone finally buzzed. My heart jumped like a foolish thing. "Hey, Mom, sorry, plans kinda changed." I stared at the screen. Another message followed. "We'll come later, though, promise." Later. That word mothers learn to fear. I sat back down. I didn't cry. Not yet. Because hope doesn't die immediately. It lingers, embarrassed, pretending it still belongs. I waited. The tea grew cold again. The cinnamon rolls hardened at the edges. Outside, I heard laughter from a neighboring house. Someone else's family. Someone else's Mother's Day. By evening, I was scrolling on my phone without really seeing anything. Then I saw it. A photo. Bright lights, music, glasses raised. My children, all 3 of them, together, at a party. Mother's Day balloons in the background. My hands went numb. And still I made excuses for them. They're young, they're busy, they'll come later. Because accepting the truth felt worse than waiting. They arrived just as the sun began to sink. That hour of the day when the light turns orange and everything looks softer than it really is. I heard the car doors before I saw them. Laughter, keys jangling, familiar voices that once used to make my chest feel warm. Now they made my stomach tighten. I stood up too quickly and felt the room tilt for a moment. I waited for it to pass. I wasn't going to greet them sitting down like an old woman. The front door opened without knocking. "Mom!" Mark's voice filled the house first, confident and loud, like he still owned the place. Rachel followed, heels clicking against the floor, already checking her phone. Andrew came last, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the room. No one said Happy Mother's Day. Not at first. They walked into the living room like guests returning to a hotel they hadn't paid for. Mark dropped onto the couch and stretched his arms. "Wow," he said. "Smells good in here." Rachel glanced at the table. "Oh, you made tea?" Her voice carried that tone, polite, distant, already uninterested. I nodded. "I thought we could sit together for a bit." I waited. No one moved toward the table. Andrew cleared his throat. "So, Mom, before we forget." There it was, that familiar tightening in my chest. He didn't even sit down. "Do you remember that thing I told you about last week?" I searched my memory. There were so many things. "The car," he continued. "The repair turned out to be way more than expected." Rachel finally looked up from her phone. "And my electric bill doubled this month. I don't know what's going on with these companies." Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I hate to ask you on Mother's Day," he said, not hating it at all, "but we're kind of stuck." I stood there, listening. 3 grown adults. 3 people I had fed, clothed, educated. All of them staring at me the same way children stare at a parent's wallet. "I made cinnamon rolls," I said softly. Rachel smiled briefly. "Maybe later." They sat, not at the table, on the couch. Mark pulled out his phone and started scrolling. Andrew looked around the room. He asked if he still had the old TV. "You know, you could sell some of this stuff, downsize a bit." I flinched. Rachel laughed lightly. "He's right, Mom. You don't really need all this space." Need. That word again. I poured tea anyway. My hands shook as I carried the tray to the table. I waited for them to join me. They didn't. I brought the cups back untouched. Mark finally said it plainly. "So, what do you think you could help us with?" Just like that. No preamble, no gratitude, just expectation. I sat down slowly. "How much?" I asked. They exchanged glances. Numbers were mentioned, casually, as if we were discussing groceries. I nodded. I always nodded. Rachel reached into her purse. "Can I use your phone for a second? Mine's dead." I handed it to her without thinking, because for 70 years my instincts had been trained to say yes before my brain could speak. She tapped quickly, then handed it back. "Thanks." She smiled. They talked among themselves after that, about the party, about people I didn't know, about plans I wasn't invited to. Their voices faded into background noise. Something in me felt distant, like I was watching my own life from the outside. When they finally stood to leave, Mark kissed my cheek. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom." It felt like a joke told too late. Rachel waved. "Text us, okay?" Andrew gave a half smile. "We'll pay you back." The door closed. I stood in the quiet. Then my phone buzzed. A notification. A message preview. Not meant for me. I unlocked the screen and saw names I knew too well. A group chat. Their group chat. And the words I was never supposed to read. I stared at the screen for a long time before I touched anything. The house was quiet again, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. This was the kind that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. The group chat name sat at the top of the screen. The Kids, red heart. I almost laughed. My thumb hovered. Some part of me still wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was nothing. That part of me had kept me alive for decades. I opened it. The first message I saw was from Mark. "Did she give you anything yet?" Rachel replied almost immediately. "Not yet. We stayed polite." Andrew followed. "She always caves. Just wait." My throat tightened. I scrolled, slowly, because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. "I swear she lives for this stuff," Rachel wrote. "Being needed is her whole personality." Mark reacted with a laughing emoji. "Old cash cow still thinks we're coming for tea, LOL. Another message. "Just don't push too hard today. Mother's Day guilt works better if we space it out." I sat down hard in the chair. My knees gave out before my heart did. I kept reading. Because pain has gravity, it pulls you in even when you want to look away. "Honestly, how long do you think she'll keep paying?" "As long as she's breathing," Mark replied. "She's got nothing else." Nothing else. 70 years of living reduced to a punchline. I thought about the nights I stayed awake when they were sick, the jobs I didn't take because they needed stability, the meals I skipped so they could eat more. All of it compressed into one sentence. She's got nothing else. My vision blurred, not from tears, from shock, because cruelty hurts more when it's casual. They weren't angry, they weren't desperate, they were amused. One message stopped me completely. Andrew wrote, "Just be careful. If she ever realizes we don't actually care, the money stops." Rachel replied, "Relax, she won't. She needs us more than we need her." That was the moment, not the insults, not the mocking, that sentence, because it told me something worse than hatred. It told me they had already buried me emotionally. I was just a resource they hadn't finished draining. I set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. I stood up and walked into the kitchen. The cinnamon rolls were still on the counter, cold now, hard at the edges. I touched one. It crumbled slightly under my fingers, just like something else inside me. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, I felt hollow, like a room after the furniture has been removed. I washed the teacups, slowly, one by one. I rinsed the sugar cubes down the sink. I folded the tablecloth with precision because if I stopped moving, I was afraid I would disappear. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Memories came uninvited. Mark at 5, afraid of the dark. Rachel crying after her first heartbreak. Andrew holding my hand at his graduation. I had believed love was permanent. I was wrong. Love can decay silently. Around 3 in the morning, I made a decision, not a dramatic one, not fueled by anger, but calm, cold, clear. I would never confront them. I would never beg, and I would never explain, because explanations are still a form of pleading. Instead, I would protect what was left of me. The next morning, I put on my coat, I took my purse, and I made an appointment with a lawyer. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. It was the kind of place where time slowed down, where people came when something had already gone wrong. I sat in the chair across from his desk and folded my hands in my lap. They looked small, older. Hands that had held babies now trembling slightly as they rested against each other. He asked me why I was there. I opened my mouth, and for a moment, nothing came out. Because how do you explain 70 years of love being quietly repurposed into leverage? So I started small. "I want to make sure my affairs are in order." He nodded. That sentence alone carries a lot of history. As I spoke, I watched his expression. It didn't change. No shock, no judgment, just recognition. He had seen this story before. Children who learned how to ask without gratitude. Parents who confused giving with love. We went through my accounts, savings, pension, insurance. I watched the numbers appear on paper, numbers I had never really looked at before, because I was raised to believe money was for family, that hoarding it was selfish, that boundaries were cold. He asked gently, "Who are your current beneficiaries?" I said their names automatically, all three. He paused. "Do you still want that?" The room went very quiet. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where they weren't the center of my decisions. My chest tightened, then loosened. "No," I said, and the word felt strange in my mouth, but it also felt honest. We changed everything. Beneficiaries, access permissions, emergency contacts. Each signature felt like removing a thread that had been tied too tightly around my life. I expected guilt. Instead, I felt relief. Before I left, the lawyer looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "You're not being cruel. You're being careful." I carried that sentence with me like armor. At home, the house felt different. Not emptier, just quieter, like it was waiting to see who I would become next. Over the following weeks, I did something I had never done before. I didn't answer immediately. When Mark called, I let it ring. When Rachel texted, I waited hours. When Andrew asked for a small favor, I said, "I can't right now." The silence that followed was telling. They weren't worried about me, they were worried about access. The calls changed tone. Confusion, then irritation, then entitlement. What's at the core of those tones? My family. I began sorting through the house, not with sadness, with clarity. Room by room, I touched objects and asked myself one question. Did I keep this for me, or in case one of them wanted it someday? The answer surprised me. I sold things they had claimed emotionally but never physically. The china set Rachel said she wanted eventually. The tools Mark said were important memories. The furniture Andrew assumed would be his. They never asked if I needed them. They only assumed they were next in line. As I boxed items to donate, memories surfaced. Not painful ones, just honest ones. Times I stayed because I felt needed. Times I gave because saying no felt like abandonment. I finally understood something important. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing what I provided. One evening, as I sat among half-packed boxes, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the group chat. This time, I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The real estate agent arrived on a Tuesday morning. She was young, polite, efficient, already glancing at her tablet before she finished greeting me. I didn't mind. This wasn't sentimental work for her. It was practical. And for once, that suited me. She walked through the house taking notes. Good bones. Lots of natural light. Family home. That last phrase echoed longer than the others. Family home. I followed her into each room, watching her see value where I had stored memories. The corner where Mark learned to ride a bike, straight into the fence. The hallway where Rachel practiced walking in heels before her first dance. The kitchen table where Andrew once cried because he thought he had disappointed me. I had told him he never could. When the agent asked why I was selling, I surprised myself by answering honestly. "I don't need this much space anymore." She nodded like that explained everything. In a way, it did. The first offer came quickly. Too quickly. I stared at the number. More money than I had ever seen written next to something that belonged to me. I accepted, without hesitation, because hesitation is what keeps people trapped. The days that followed were strange. People walked through my home with measuring tapes and opinions. This would make a great office. We'd knock this wall down. The backyard has potential. I smiled and thought, so do I. I didn't tell my children, not at first. I wanted the decision to exist fully before it was questioned, because if I left them in too early, they would try to negotiate my freedom. Packing was slow, not because it was difficult, but because I did it deliberately. I touched each object and asked, "Do I want to take this into my future?" Some things went into boxes, others went into donation piles, and some went into the trash: letters, cards, guilt I had mistaken for obligation. When Rachel finally noticed something was off, it was because she drove by. She called immediately. "Why is there a for sale sign in front of your house?" I didn't sit down. "I'm moving." There was a pause, then laughter. "You're serious?" "Yes." Another pause. "Where?" "Not far," I said, which was true, just not in the way she thought. Mark called next, angry. "You didn't think to tell us?" I didn't think I needed permission. That silence tasted new. Andrew tried a different approach, concern. "Is everything okay, Mom?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure." They arrived the following weekend, unannounced, again, standing in the doorway like inspectors. "What's going on? Why are you doing this? You can't just disappear." "Disappear?" I almost smiled. "This house was never just yours," Mark said. I looked at him carefully. "You moved out 20 years ago." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Rachel gestured at the walls. "These things matter." "They mattered," I corrected, "when we lived them together." I didn't argue, I didn't explain, because explanations invite debate, and I wasn't debating my life anymore. The day I handed over the keys, I stood in the empty living room. No furniture, no photos, just echoes. I placed my hand against the wall one last time, not to say goodbye, but to say thank you. That night, I slept in a small rented room. The bed was narrow, the walls were bare, and for the first time in years, I slept deeply. I didn't tell them where I was going. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I finally understood something very simple. People who only visit you when they need something don't deserve directions to your peace. The senior community was quiet. Not the sad kind of quiet people imagine. This was a living quiet. Morning walks, shared breakfasts, names learned slowly and remembered carefully. No one asked what I owned. No one asked what I could give. They only asked how I slept. I furnished my new apartment with intention. One chair by the window, one small table, one shelf for books I actually wanted to read. I planted a flower on the balcony. It bloomed without being asked. I liked that. The calls came for a while. At first, confusion. "Mom, we can't reach you. Where are you? Why aren't you answering?" Then frustration. "This isn't funny. You're being dramatic. You're overreacting." Then anger. "You owe us an explanation." I never responded, because the truth was already written in every unanswered call. I met with my lawyer one last time. We finalized everything. Charities I cared about, education funds for children who had no one, a small trust for emergencies, just not theirs. When he asked if I was sure, I nodded. "I already raised my children," I said. "This is for the rest of my life." On a quiet afternoon, I packed 3 boxes, one for each of them. Inside, I placed the only inheritance they had truly earned: old drawings, school certificates, photos of hands once held willingly, and a note written slowly, carefully, without anger. "I loved you when love was enough. These memories are real. Everything else was borrowed." I mailed the boxes. Then I went for a walk. The sun was warm. I realized something then that made me stop in the middle of the path. I wasn't lonely. I had been lonely before, when I was surrounded by people who only loved what I provided. Mother's Day came again the following year. I bought myself flowers, sat by the window, made tea, and drank it while it was still warm. No waiting, no hoping, no setting extra cups just in case. They say a mother's love is unconditional, but what they don't tell you is this: self-respect has conditions, and when love becomes exploitation, walking away isn't cruelty, it's survival.